you for coming. How about that election, huh? We have some great speakers tonight. Bill Finley, he's come all the way from Florida. So we need to give him a great welcome. And of course, our great Secretary of State, Kris Kobach. Where's he at? Where's he at? He's in the hall. He'll be here. I had dinner with him, so he's here. So we'll get started right now. And I want to make sure to tell you all that we won't have a meeting next month. It's January 2nd, it's first Tuesday, so we won't have a meeting. But we will in February. And we're working on a really neat speaker for February or March. So, also, there are blue pots out here. Please, your heart tells you, we need you to donate because we brought Bill in from Florida. Jenny has paid for a lot of stuff. We'd like to get her reimbursed. And so I ask for you to please donate and do what your heart tells you to do. Bones, come on up.
Hoorah!
You're the man.
Hoorah!
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, we'll have a couple of hoorahs tonight, I'm sure. And great to see you all here this evening. Our thoughts, I want you to think about this for just a second before a prayer. Our thoughts and prayers this 2014 Christmas season, I think needs to be intent, needs to be direct, and to the point. Our country needs to go back to "In God We Trust."
Amen.
In all our families' lives, in our schools, our local and state governments, and return back to the constitutional government with liberty and justice for all that our forefathers established over 200 years ago. Okay. And as we pray tonight, let's think of those things as we visit with the Lord. Please join me in prayer. Dear Lord, as we see our Christian nation grow further and further from you, we need your powerful and loving guidance to bring together the many freedoms, loving factions that have drifted away from the single purpose that the government is for and by the people. Lord, we are seeing the breakdown of our Constitution that the founders of this great nation wrote with God as the foundation. We are seeing various agencies accusing each other of wrongdoing. Distrust seems to be our cry these days. Lord, as we stop to celebrate Christ's birthday this Christmas time, the Prince of Peace, we ask you, give each one of us here tonight the strength and resolve to resist any and all pressures to break our will to remain the honor and glory of being a strong, free, and God-fearing nation we once were. Lord, thank you for bringing us together this evening to hear words that will light the fire of freedom in our hearts. May everyone here have a blessed Christmas season, remembering that only through you, Lord, in God we trust, can we really be free. We pray these things through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Let's please stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing. I want to, we were originally had, Ryan Gage was going to honor us by singing, and he got involved at the very last moment, and we were very fortunate to get a young man that I think is really, really can sing the national anthem, and that's Colby Comley from Hutchinson. Colby, we're glad to have you here, and we we thank you for being here at the last moment, I'll tell you for sure.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Glad to be here. Glad to see all of you here too. I am so excited about tonight. I have the pleasure to introduce to you a passionate conservative, Mr. Bill Findley, better known as Wild Bill for America. In 2011, Wild Bill became as distraught as the rest of us about where our nation was headed. He saw us losing our freedoms, changing our laws without representation, circumventing the Constitution, and becoming, as Reagan said, a country gone under. The difference between us and Wild Bill is that he decided to speak out about the issues that caused all of us grief. He has become a well-known advocate for conservative principles by using the internet. Some of us aren't quite there yet. Specifically, YouTube, to reach millions with his messages. At last count, Google had him at 12 million hits. He's a man known for the hats he wears and the coffee cups he holds up for emphasis. You all know him as Wild Bill for America. Would you please give him a huge Kansas Plains welcome?
Okay, did I find that mute button? How about now? Okay, how's that?
Yeah.
Good. There is more than one person in this country who is tied to a teleprompter. I apologize for that. But thank you so much for bringing me back. I live in Daytona Beach, Florida, so I am really enjoying these nice cool breezes while I'm here. I can't wait to tell all my friends about them. They're going to be so jealous. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my mission in life is to call Americans back to the God and country principles that founded this nation and were the key to the success of this nation. We're facing a lot of troubles in this world in these days, and some would say that we are, in fact, in crisis mode. But since we're just coming off the Thanksgiving holiday, let me give you some words of encouragement from Daniel Greenfield. Daniel writes, "When we celebrate Thanksgiving, being thankful for family and friends, food and shelter, health and comfort, we should also be thankful for the left. Without evil, the good often fail to find their voice.
Yeah.
It is in the presence of slavery that we remember the worth of freedom. It is because conservatives are basically hopeful and confident that we are prone to extremes of despair. Too many of us were shocked at the decline of our society because of our great faith in it. The faith conservatives have in America makes them vulnerable to being crushed by victories of the left. I've seen far too much despair and defeatism. Too many comments suggest that there is no hope for America, and the only thing to do is pour a glass of wine or Budweiser, and watch the sun go down. But those comments testify to how sheltered Americans are from struggles for tyranny, against tyranny. 8 years of Obama are bad, but try 69 years of communism on for size. That's what the Russians had to live through. There are countless tales of courageous men and women who did not stop fighting and who did not stop teaching their children so they would not stop resisting. The international left has made America its special target. If they can extinguish the hope of liberty in this land, then it will drive those overseas who hope for freedom deeper into despair. They want you to give up so that the rest of the world gives up too and bows under the chains of the left. This fight is a glorious one. This fight is our birthright. And we should be thankful for the fight. Good emerges in response to evil. We need our enemies to remind us of who we are and what we can do when our backs are to the wall. Evil sharpens us into a weapon against it. It makes us morally stronger and teaches us the stark truth that we cannot take refuge from evil. We must confront it. If there was no left, would there be as much patriotism among true Americans as there is now? Would we value freedom as much if we did not have to defend it? Would we hold it as dear if we had no fear of it being taken away? As the left works to doom our country and as we suffer defeats, it reminds us that we are called to be better than we are, to do more, learn more, and become more if we are to save our country. As we fight the left, we become stronger, more dedicated, and more purposeful. We become the men and women we are meant to be. Thank you, Daniel Greenfield. It is my firm belief that the primary reason we are in such a pickle is because the USA took a hard left turn off the God Country Highway into moral and ethical quicksand. The enemies of faith and freedom have had a heyday shoving traditional American values out of the way and replacing them with godless, socialist, hedonist Marxism. We let it happen. We allowed the seeds of corruption to be sown in our society, and now we are reaping a crop of corruption. That's the way it works. The law of sowing and reaping does not change. And if we want to get back to reaping good things in this country, we need to get back to sowing good seed instead of bad. Now, when I speak to Americans around the country, I try not to just talk about the problems. I also try to give some common sense solutions. Far too many are discouraged and they feel that they're losing their country. Many want to take action, but they're not sure where to start. I have some ideas of some specific things that might help, and I'll get to those in a little bit. Jenny asked me to come here today to speak about amnesty. Obama's amnesty. It's a little different than real amnesty. In fact, as a former law enforcement officer, I really don't think amnesty is the right word for it. I think conspiracy to violate the immigration laws of the USA is more accurate.
Amen.
Yeah.
A criminal offense, a prosecutable offense, 5 million counts of a prosecutable offense. And what about those sanctuary cities? Really? Where government officials publicly announce that criminals can take refuge there and be safe from prosecution? That's right, I call them criminals. I am not politically correct. They are not undocumented guests, they are criminal trespassers. What those sanctuary cities are doing is obstruction of justice, harboring fugitives, malfeasance of duty, and conspiracy to violate the immigration laws of the U.S. How many of those government officials were prosecuted? 0. How many lawsuits were filed to force compliance with the law? None that I know of. Have we finally reached the point where political correctness trumps law and order? Gee, what could possibly go wrong there? And it's not just the Democrats. I know there are a lot of Republicans here today, and I'm probably going to make some of you mad. And here's why. I am here as a representative of the American people, and we the people are fighting mad at the Washington, D.C. politicians on both sides of the aisle.
That's right. Woo!
Now, before I cut loose on the D.C. Republicans, let me say that I have traveled this country, speaking at Tea Party and other patriotic gatherings, and I've met many impressive Republicans, especially right here in Kansas. Rock solid, God and country Americans who are determined to do their best for their nation. And in my opinion, Kris Kobach is one of the best. But Washington, D.C. is a hot mess, and this amnesty foolishness illustrates that. Now, this problem should have been nipped in the bud a few years ago when the Democrats were testing the waters to see if they could get away with something like this. What they should have gotten was a resounding hell no. We will not tolerate the undermining of American sovereignty or blatant violations of our nation's laws and national security. Our oath of office demands that we stand firm. That's what they should have heard. But what they did here was weakness, appeasement, waffling, flip-flopping, and willingness to compromise our principles. Politicians thinking more about their next election than about their duty to this country. It is wimpy, weak, Pee-wee Herman leadership that has brought us to this brink of disaster. Our nation of law and order has become a nation of political opportunists who violate the law whenever they feel like it. What kind of seeds are they sowing? And what kind of crop will America reap because of it? This is from Breitbart. Representative Michelle Bachmann revealed on Saturday that Republican leadership, led by Speaker of the House John Boehner, has no intention of resisting President Obama's executive amnesty that he ordered on Thursday. In a weekly meeting in the House of Representatives, she says, "We all knew the big issue for the week was going to be the president announcing his amnesty." Bachmann recounted that all of the leadership went to the microphone, including Boehner. They acted as if the amnesty issue wasn't even an issue. They said, the president's going to do what he's going to do, and we are not going to get down into the mud with him. We are not going to engage. We are going to talk about our positive message about jobs, the economy, education, and manufacturing. Bachmann added that each congressman who spoke reiterated that not engaging Obama and staying positive was a brilliant strategy. We will not engage, she reiterated with disgust. The Washington D.C. Republicans have failed the American people.
Yep.
Because of their weakness, our system of checks and balances has failed.
Yep.
They will not fight for the American people. They will not stand for freedom against a totalitarian president. My personal opinion is that they are too afraid of the media. They are frozen by the fear that if they get tough with the black man in the White House, the media will crucify them as racists. I speak for a lot of people when I say that we are sick and tired of cowardice in the House of Representatives.
Amen.
If I was in that House, I would have already introduced a bill that any person who knowingly and intentionally violates the immigration laws of the USA shall not be eligible for U.S. citizenship. Why that's not already on the books, I have no idea. Why in the world would we want to offer citizenship to people whose first act is to break our law? And what about all the good people who have been waiting patiently to legally immigrate? What message does this amnesty send to them? Suckers, giving them the finger when they should be honored for their integrity. This is not America's proudest moment. The American people spoke loud and clear in the last election, and they said no to Obama's amnesty. So why are the career politicians openly betraying the will of the people? I'll tell you why. Because the Washington, D.C. Republicans are absolutely confident that no matter how badly they betray us, when election day rolls around, we will still vote for them because we are afraid not to.
Yes.
And they are going to continue to let us down until we knock that confidence out of them.
Yep.
Until they are more afraid of the voters than they are of the liberal media.
Yep.
We keep voting for these guys because we are frightened of what the Democrats will do if they are given a free hand. But you know what? With men like John Boehner and Mitch McConnell in charge, the Democrats have a free hand.
Yep. Absolutely.
Make no mistake about it, we are in the Super Bowl of all battles for the heart and soul of America. Now, at this point, I could give you a laundry list of the disgraceful, immoral, and corrupt practices of our government, but you probably know them as well as I do. That's why we're here. Amnesty. Traditionally, it is granted after officials review the facts of the case and take into consideration the person who is being granted amnesty. What Mr. Obama is doing is wildly reckless, granting blanket amnesty to millions who all have one thing in common. They have no qualms about breaking the law if it suits their purpose. I think the common term for that is Democrat voter.
Yeah.
Obama has no idea who he is granting amnesty to. The poor children are a small fraction of what's coming across that border. That border is just as open to the hounds of hell who intend to do harm to the USA. And apparently Mr. Obama doesn't care. As a former law enforcement officer, I can't help but wonder how many prisons and mental institutions are being emptied all over Mexico and South America, and the worst of the worst are headed to the USA, where a driver's license, a cell phone, and a bunch of welfare checks are waiting for them. Fidel Castro got Jimmy Carter the same way, back when he was foolish enough to open the floodgates. And Miami ended up with a brutal crime wave. It's not the Swedish bikini team coming across that border. It's an invasion of welfare seekers who will be loyal Democrat voters. This is nothing but a naked power grab by the Democrats so that they will no longer have to fear the ballot box. What will happen to American freedom when we cannot limit people like Harry Reid, Sheila Jackson Lee, and Hillary? Do we really want them to have total control over what freedoms we are allowed to have? So what do? That's the big question. It used to be that we could afford to wait until the next election and hope that the cowards would be replaced. But the way things are going under the Obama administration, there are a lot of people who fear that freedom will not survive another 2 years. After handing the Washington, D.C. Republicans a tremendous victory a few weeks ago, and then watching John Boehner and Mitch McConnell nullify it with their almost immediate capitulation to lawlessness, that was the last straw for me.
Yeah.
I'm done looking for a solution from Washington, D.C.
Amen.
The best hope for the survival of American freedom is for the states themselves to courageously stand upon their 10th Amendment power.
Amen.
State sovereignty needs to be the tranquilizer dart in the butt of the federal government. I want you to listen carefully to what Thomas Jefferson said. Quote, "If Congress fails to shield the states from dangers so palpable and so imminent, the states must shield themselves and meet the invader foot to foot." Mr. Obama has knowingly and intentionally put Kansas in danger from foreign invaders. The Congress is failing to do their duty. So guess who has the duty to defend the state of Kansas? The governor and the state legislature are the men and women charged with taking a stand against this lawless and out of control federal government. It's time for bold talk and courageous action. It's time for the people of Kansas to rally behind them and the elected sheriffs of your state.
Amen.
The sheriff has tremendous power under the Constitution to push back federal overreach. Has Sheriff Mack been here to speak yet? If not, you need to bring Sheriff Richard Mack out
Yeah.
to talk about constitutional sheriffs. It'll be very, very informative. I am so glad that Kansas has a measure of common sense. California, I knew I'd get a chuckle just saying that word. California, on the other hand, is now allowing, are you ready for this? Illegals to practice law in California courtrooms. We have officially entered the twilight zone.
Yep.
I was in Northern California a few weeks ago, the normal part of California. The plane was supposed to land in Sacramento, but the weather was bad and they were forced to go on to San Francisco.
Oh.
And they weren't sure how they were going to get us back to Sacramento. And I thought, great. Here I am in San Francisco at midnight, wearing black leather and a cowboy hat. What could possibly go wrong? But fortunately, I didn't have to get off the plane. The weather cleared and we went back to Sacramento. Now, up in the far north of California are a lot of patriotic people who are totally fed up. Their God and country common sense votes are totally trampled by the millions of Looney Tune votes from San Francisco and Los Angeles. The people up there are working seriously on a plan to form a new state, the state of Jefferson. Wouldn't it be poetic justice to carve out a new state, taking the most beautiful counties in the most liberal state? I've already been on homes.com looking at houses. If Jefferson becomes a reality, I'm going. And
we could give Southern California to Canada.
I'm glad some of the people in California are still speaking to me. I was on a radio show out of Canada last year, and I worked really hard to broker a deal to trade California straight across for British Columbia. And negotiations seemed to be going well until they asked me if Pelosi was going to be a part of the deal. The organizers for Jefferson say they have all the support they need in the new Congress. But I don't think there's any way the California state legislature will give them the go-ahead, especially if they think it would honor God. So, rabble-rouser that I am, I encourage them to do it anyway.
Yep.
This nation was not formed by asking permission from tyrants.
Amen.
And we never have to ask permission from evil men to honor our God.
That's right.
Amen.
And Thomas Jefferson himself once said, "A little rebellion now and then is a good thing." Now, when Jenny and I were talking about me coming out here, amnesty was just a threat. She said that by the time I get here, some things might have actually happened. Well, a few things have happened. I believe that amnesty and what has happened in Ferguson, Missouri are tied together. They are both products of the shameful skin color politics that the left has been inflicting on this nation for decades. Intentionally causing racial division all across America has been a despicable but effective tool of the Democrats. Racism is one of their favorite words, and they throw it in the face of anyone who gets in their way. If you believe we should screen the people we let into this country, you're a racist. Against amnesty? Racist. Want to cut spending? You're a racist. Concerned about Islamic violence? You're a racist. If you demand that the president obey the law, you're a racist. And fear of being called a racist has caused far too many Americans to wither when they should have stood firm. And ironically, the people who cry racism the most tend to be the most racist people in America. Racism should have died out a long time ago in this country, and I believe it would have, except that certain people learned that racism can be very profitable, both financially and politically. Certain reverends gain money and prestige by sowing the seeds of racial hatred in American neighborhoods. Well, here's a wild bill bullet of truth for those reverends. It is a sin to plant resentment in the heart of a child. And one day, you will answer to the ultimate authority for what you have done.
That's right.
That's right.
And then there are unscrupulous politicians who fan the flames of racial strife when election time rolls around, keeping Americans at each other's throats and getting elected and re-elected by promising revenge for perceived injustices. They call us racist, but you know how to identify the real racist in America? They're the ones who try to turn everything into a skin color issue. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream, and it was a good one. He dreamed of a day when we would move beyond the ridiculous skin color politics to a day when character counted more. Isn't it ironic that the people who are trampling Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream into the dirt are the ones who hold him up as their hero? I think Martin Luther King Jr. would be appalled at what has essentially become the skin color mafia of America. It's time for Americans to stand up to the skin color mafia and call them out. I recently did a video called The Skin Color Mafia, and in it, I made the point that there is a nationwide organization that uses skin color politics in ways that appear to be violations of the RICO statutes, the racketeer and corrupt organization laws that were designed to bring down organized crime families. I believe there is cooperation between the street thugs, the radical reverends, and some elected officials who profit through the use of coercion, violence, and threats of violence to intimidate government officials, to corrupt the judicial process, and to extort money and services.
That's right.
Ferguson, Missouri burned because that's what the skin color mafia told us they would do if they did not get the grand jury verdict they wanted. When I look at Ferguson, Missouri, I see obstruction of justice, extortion, arson, intimidation of witnesses, and possibly even the assassination of one of the grand jury witnesses. These are crimes that have gotten big-time mobsters sent to prison under the RICO statutes. I think we need some good investigators to start connecting the dots. Who are the leaders? Who funds these criminal actions and who directs them? I would not be at all surprised to see that trail lead straight to some of the highest elected offices in this country. I truly believe the violence in Ferguson was planned and organized. And it's time for the skin color mafia to be classified as a criminal organization and treated as such.
Right. Yes.
Okay, let's talk about some things that we can do. Now, I've been a member of the Tea Party from day one. I remember when it first sprang into existence, scaring the daylights out of the politics as usual gang. on both sides of the aisle. The Tea Party very quickly became the most influential grassroots organization in American history, and within a few years was responsible for removing over 700 bad elected officials, from Congress down to small local city councilmen. Now, we really don't know exactly how many Tea Party Americans there are. Many Americans are Tea Party without even knowing it. People who believe that the government should obey the law, and that the government that collects tax money has a moral and ethical obligation to spend that money wisely. That is the Tea Party in a nutshell. And I think millions of Americans believe that also. Well, the Tea Party is now about 5 years old, still a toddler, and we seem to have settled into a nice, comfortable routine. Events like this are held all over the country, lots of speeches given, generally to people who are already solid God and country patriots. We need to break out of that mold. We need to have the courage to step outside of our comfort zones, and here's why. The media has done a hatchet job on us. They have relentlessly slandered us as racist and hate-filled, angry people. Their lies are shameful, but they will not stop. We will never get a fair shake from the media. The only way we will ever get control of our public image is to make an end run around the media. I am encouraging Tea Party groups all over the country to start planning a big annual community bash. Call it a God and Country Festival, and do it right downtown. Not inside an event center, not at a fairground, right downtown where everyone is invited to enjoy good food, good music, dancing in the streets, and to hear inspirational speakers. That is how the people of this nation will meet us and learn that we are not the ogres that the media has portrayed us as. And here's another bullet of truth. If we do not control our image, the media will control it for us, and it will be ugly. I see a lot of heads nodding. You guys know what I'm talking about. A few months ago, I spoke at an event in Tennessee, and we were so far out in the boonies that we didn't even have cell phone coverage. We were out there supposedly so that the NSA couldn't find us. Well, guess who else couldn't find us? The 2,000 people that were supposed to be there. Joe Dan Gorman was there, and we got to talking and decided that to maximize the effectiveness of patriotic events, we need to start dropping these things right in the middle of enemy territory, where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, where there are a lot of ignorant voters. College campuses would be ideal. Would there be protesters? I hope so. That generates coverage. You media guys love that, don't you? Are you willing to trade these nice, comfortable chairs for a place where hate mongers might be screaming in your face?
Yeah.
Would you do it if it would increase the effectiveness of our impact on America? Let the protesters come. If they're close enough to protest, they're close enough to hear the message. And the majority of people passing by would probably be hearing the God and country message for the very first time. They're not going to come to these events. The only way to reach them is for us to go out there, to go into the arena. We need to get our message to millions who have not yet heard it. And we need to build up our public image. Every Tea Party chapter should have one person who works as the public relations specialist, constantly thinking of ways to boost the reputation and influence of the Tea Party. Select a local business and present them with a Tea Party Community Service Award, a nice plaque that they can display. Do the same for faithful pastors in the area, especially black pastors who serve well. Little things like that will chip away at the media's false image of us. Another area where the Tea Party has failed miserably is connecting with the teens and 20-year-olds. Unless we find a way to connect with them, the Tea Party will die with our generation. And we all know what that would mean to American freedom. Now, when I was sitting in the airports coming out here, I watched the young people, the teens, zeroed in on their electronics, totally oblivious to what was going on around them. I can't believe they even made their connections. They're not going to come and sit in these events. We're going to have to reach them, and it's going to have to be electronic. Why are there no hip-hop songs about red, white, and blue, one nation under God? Proud to be American, pro-family. I think simply because nobody has bothered. Now, Jenny and Jean and I have been kind of bantering this about. Is the cause of saving American freedom important enough for us to step out and attempt some new things, new ways of doing things?
Absolutely.
If missionaries can travel across the oceans to live with cannibals, the Tea Party can reach out to the teens in their language. Let's find some good teens who can really sing and dance. Let's throw our support into making them pop stars for America. With 40 million Tea Partiers in this country, all we'd have to do is play their song once on our phones, and it would shoot them to the top of the internet search engines, and these kids that are locked into their own little electronic world would start hearing the God and country message. And maybe they'll start paying attention to what the Tea Party stands for. As I said earlier, the law of sowing and reaping does not change. If we want to stop reaping a crop of corruption, we need to start sowing good seeds in our community. And these are ways that we might be able to do that. And that's why I am dedicated to calling Americans back to the God and country values of our forefathers. Their deep respect and reverence for the Word of God was the active ingredient in American success, freedom, and prosperity. Now, when the left began their assault in earnest on American values, the first things they targeted were prayer and the Bible, to get them out of sight of the American people and to erase them from American history. Barack Obama says the most beautiful sound in the world is the Muslim call to prayer. I disagree. I think the most beautiful sound in the world is the sound of offended liberals screaming like chimpanzees. If you want to make them scream, then join me in picking up the banner of God and country and marching it right back into the public square where it was for the first 200 years of this nation's history.
That's right.
I always end my videos with America, bless God, again. Now, some have taken me to task for that, saying, Bill, you have it backwards. We should be asking God to bless America. My answer to that is no. God has blessed America, and look what we've done with it. The Psalms tell us about Israel blessing God by honoring Him and obeying Him. And I think it's high time for the USA to get back to doing exactly that.
That's right.
Amen.
The bad guys say never let a crisis go to waste. I agree. The USA is in crisis mode, and we should use that to inspire our people to take great steps of courage and to explore new ways of advancing the cause of freedom in America. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you. Let's keep in touch and do some good work together. And America, bless God, again.
Yeah.
Way to go, Wild Bill. Thank you. Thanks for those words. Means a lot to us. I'm so excited that our own Secretary of State is here to speak with us. And I really don't need to tell you, you all have tracked, you know his values, and you know how committed he is to those values. He stood up to so much heat in throughout the nation, and has had an impact on our whole nation. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Secretary of State Kris Kobach.
maybe I'll, I don't know. Not sure if I'm going to walk around or not. Well, thank you very much. You're not supposed to give me a standing ovation at the beginning because now the expectations are high. Well, it's great to be here. The last time I was here, I think it was 4 years ago, in the 2010 election. And what an election that was. What an election that should have been in terms of sending a message to our president and his administration. But unfortunately, it didn't. And things have gotten so much worse than they were in 2010. Oh, for the good old days of 2010. And just imagine if things continue on our present course, they'll be saying, oh, for the good old days of 2014. Now, our country's on a bad trajectory right now. And I want to talk to you about that, but I thought by way of introduction, I might start with a little document that you're probably familiar with, the Declaration of Independence. Now, there are some pretty well-studied people in this audience. What parts of the Declaration of Independence could you recite from memory? Anyone?
Sending swarms of officers to harass the people.
There you go. That's where I'm going.
That's
But what do most people remember, if anything? Well, we the people's the Constitution.
Constitution.
But that's a good one to remember. Yeah, we remember all men are created equal, all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Those are the most famous words of the Declaration of Independence. And then we might remember the closing words of the Declaration of Independence, where the Founding Fathers made a petition to God. I think this is really important. Many people were never taught this in school. Let me just read this. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. We're not appealing to France. We're not appealing to the German principalities. We're not appealing to England. We're appealing to God for the rightness of our cause. And then in the final sentence, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Last sentence of the Declaration of Independence. So you might remember some of the closing words, you might remember some of the opening words, but the middle part, it reads like a legal document. And that's why most people either skim through it or they forget it. And Bill mentioned one of the petitions. It's a series of petitions, the Declaration of Independence, a series of legal arguments made to essentially the crown, made to the world, but about the crown. These are legal complaints against the King of England. And I want to read for you, I was reviewing this summer as things got more and more dire in this country. And I want to review just a few of them. When they refer to he, they're referring to the king. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. Here's another one. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government. And here's Bill's favorite. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. The essence of the Declaration of Independence can be summed up in 3 words. Rule of law. The King of England was not abiding by the unwritten traditions of the British Constitution, and the King of England was violating the rights of the common man under the common law of England. In other words, the king was untethered. He was no longer constrained by the law. That is why our founding fathers formed this country, because our leadership, and nobody had any objections to being a British citizen. If you read the First and Second Continental Congress, they really are looking for ways to remain part of Britain. They had nothing against Britain. They had nothing against the British common law. The problem was the rule of law. This was not a people yearning to declare themselves something other than British. They were predominantly British, with some Germans and some others mixed in. They saw the problem was the rule of law had been abandoned. And now compare that to where we are today. Where's the rule of law? This is the principle, this is the foundational idea that America is all about. Our Constitution is part of that. The Constitution is our fundamental law. Our Christian heritage is part of that, because so much of our laws themselves are based on Christian principles, and it goes all the way back, not just in the United States, but the codes of the Old Testament, things like that. And legal history scholars will, document this well. But the point is, the rule of law is the bedrock. And the rule of law is under a threat right now. And I want to talk to you about 2 examples, and then I think we're going to open it up and take some questions. 2 examples of the rule of law where the rule of law is under threat and where I am personally trying to fight the fight to restore it. One is in my official capacity as Secretary of State, and one is in my private capacity as an attorney, as a former Department of Justice attorney. And I say the words Department of Justice with some embarrassment now, because the Department of Justice used to be a place where when a DOJ attorney walked into a federal courtroom, all the other attorneys knew that they were going to be receiving a very good argument, and that there were certain standards that the U.S. Department of Justice would never fall below, and that you were going to have a hard time against the U.S. Department of Justice because it was above politics. Only good arguments, only good cases, only good prosecutions were brought by the U.S. Department of Justice. Now it's a very different place. Now the Department of Justice is hyper-politicized. Cases that would never have been brought under Attorney General John Ashcroft, for whom I worked, are being brought all the time now. It is political consideration driving those cases, and it is a shame. It is a shame that this once great institution, the U.S. Department of Justice, and it was a great institution under President Clinton. It was a great institution under President Carter. This once great institution is no longer great because of the way this administration has made it a political sledgehammer. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about 2 examples of the rule of law that I'm concerned about. One concerns my official job as Secretary of State. As you know, the Secretary of State of Kansas and the Secretary of State of most states is the chief official charged with protecting the integrity of our elections and with administering our elections. And I'm very pleased to say that Kansas has proven to the nation that you can make your elections secure and free from fraud, and you can do it in a way that improves participation. You can do it in a way that continues to make it easy to vote while making it hard to cheat, and you can do it in a way that is a model for the rest of the country. Now, many of you know that when I ran for the office of Secretary of State 4 years ago, I said I wanted Kansas to become to voter fraud what Arizona was to illegal immigration. The #1 state, the pointy edge of the wedge, the state leading the way, the state that other states would look to and say, okay, if we're serious about it, we're going to follow that example. And so I drafted, and the Kansas legislature passed the Secure and Fair Elections Act of 2011, which made Kansas the first state in America to combine 3 things: photo ID at the polls, equivalent security for mail-in ballots, and proof of citizenship when you register to vote. First state in America to do that. I think that's pretty cool. And other states noticed. We were immediately copied by several states. Alabama adopted our proof of citizenship provisions almost word for word. Pennsylvania adopted a variant of our mail-in ballot provisions. I'm trying to remember the third state. Indiana adopted, no, was it Indiana? Yeah, I think it was Indiana adopted a version. No, they had theirs earlier. There was a third state that copied us. 3 states at least that I know of copied the Kansas law and adapted it to their own state. And there are other states looking at it. I've talked to people in Mississippi who are looking at our proof of citizenship provision. Arkansas is now looking at our proof of citizenship provision in light of an errant Supreme Court decision of that state, where they are now looking at putting the issue in front of the people of the state of Arkansas. I'm sorry, not Arkansas, Arkansas. I always keep Whenever I talk to the Secretary of State of Arkansas, I always correct him and say, you know your state's pronounced Arkansas, don't you? He's a good guy, he appreciates it. And then I also tell the Secretary of State of Colorado that you know why Denver was named Denver. You guys know this, right? The Denver comes from, Kansas used to be, when we were a territory, went all the way to the Continental Divide. So the equivalent of where the Eisenhower Tunnel is now, that was the western edge of Kansas. And Denver was a city founded in honor of James Denver, who was a territorial governor of Kansas. So it was named for a Kansas territorial governor. So I was shy him and said, look, your city's named after a Kansas governor. What do you got? Anyway, so other states are following Kansas. And Kansas has set the standard for showing that you can protect against voter fraud and you can make it a system where it's still very easy to vote. Now, I want to give you some statistics from this latest election. I'm going to read you some numbers here. I'll try not to bore you. But before I tell you about what happened in the 2014 elections, I want to tell you about what happened in the 2010 elections. In the 2010 elections, which was an election extremely similar to this year, Tea Party movement, unpopular president, Kansas had an open gubernatorial race, open seat, very competitive governor's race. We also had an open Senate seat, very competitive Senate race, especially the primary, but on into the general as well. It was an election that looked almost identical to this one in terms of the amount of get out the vote effort, the amount of voter excitement. All of the elements that drive participation were almost identical, and of course it was the same electorate. Most of us voting in 2014 were also Kansans in 2010. What was the participation rate in 2010? 50% was our participation rate. And again, that you might say, wow, it is. I wish it could be higher in these midterm non-presidential elections, but believe it or not, 50% is actually pretty high compared to most states. Okay, so that was our participation rate in 2010. 2011, I come in as Secretary of State, the legislature agrees to pass the legislation I propose, and we adopt the toughest set of protections in America against voter fraud. Photo ID, equivalent security for mail-in ballots, and proof of citizenship. Now, if you listen to all of the critics on the left, they will say, oh my goodness, that is going to drive down turnout. That is going to discourage voter participation because it is oh so difficult to get that driver's license out of your wallet, isn't it? And nobody has a driver's license these days. Oh, that's just crazy. Photo ID. How can you do this, Kobach? How can you impose such burdens upon voters in the state of Kansas? And a proof of citizenship. Oh my goodness, that's just too much to ask. I mean, sure, you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote, but prove it? Oh, come on. Well, anyway. So by their prediction, this isn't just, I say their official argument, this isn't just the argument of, some knucklehead on the news or some editorial writer. This is the position of the Obama administration, that these things will drive down turnout and suppress, that's their word, will suppress the vote. Okay, so we should see in 2014 turnout that is less than there was in 2010, because after all of these vote suppression measures went into place. Well, guess what? Turnout went up. It went up to 51%, with a record number of 887,000 ballots cast. That is the highest number of ballots ever cast in a non-presidential election in the state of Kansas. And by the way, the turnout of 51% was out of a larger electorate. The number of registered voters was also the highest number of registered voters going into any midterm election. The number of registered voters was 1,744,000, rounded up, 1,745,000. So a higher percentage of a larger electorate after we put in these voter security measures. Turnout went up, not down. And in my view, that should put to rest the argument that somehow the voter security measures of photo ID and proof of citizenship drive down turnout. They do not. They drive up turnout. And if you look at places that have an even long, well, I would say longer, but maybe a more persistent history of voter fraud, places like some parts of Mississippi, places like some parts of the Deep South, where corruption has been going on for a very long time. Or places, we'll never see it because Illinois will never have photo ID, but if you brought photo ID into Illinois, I guarantee turnout would go up. The reason is because in some places, so many people believe the results are fixed that they don't bother to vote. And I'm telling you this, the Secretary of State of Mississippi explained this to me. He said, there are some areas where turnout was going to go up, and it did go up. In Georgia, the same way. Because there were some counties where corruption was so endemic, but then once you had photo ID in, people began to believe that they could conquer corruption in the election process. And so turnout went up, not down. And the data is just overwhelming from Georgia. Georgia was one of the early states that had photo ID. So the turnout went up. The argument of the radical left was disproved. And beyond that, we had other interesting success. So of the 877,000 ballots cast, only 570 people showed up without a photo ID. It happens. You drive to the polls and you're without a driver's license. Oops. But you left it at home. 570 showed up without a photo ID. But of course, under our law, you have the opportunity to take until the next week to bring your photo ID in and make sure that you get to cast a provisional ballot. And then by bringing your photo ID in later, you ensure that your provisional ballot goes in the to-be-counted pile. Well, guess what? About half of those people, 267 of the 570, brought in their photo ID after the fact. They wanted to make sure their vote was counted. Now, the other 200 and some were not lacking a photo ID, and we ran the numbers last time in 2012 to see this. They just decided not to make it count. Why? Because they're in the unusual position of now standing after the election, looking back. They can see the margin. Okay, I was voting for Bob, not Susie, in the state representative race, and Susie won by 3,000 votes. Okay, that's the only election that was even close. I'm not going to bother. So lots of people say, it's not close. I'm not going to bother, and so they don't bother coming in to make it right, to make it count. Anyway, so that reduced the total number of people who didn't show ID down to 303 out of 887,000. That's 0.034%, or roughly 1 in 3,000 people. Seems to me it works pretty well.
Yes.
It is not difficult to have a photo ID. You need one to board a plane. You need one to cash a check. You need one to buy the kind of Sudafed that works. In Illinois, you need a photo ID to buy Drano. I don't know why Drano is considered a deadly weapon, but it is. Okay, so photo ID did not depress turnout in any respect in the state of Kansas. And get this. Well, what about the surrounding states? Now, I prefer to compare apples to apples. That's why I compared Kansas in 2010 to Kansas in 2014. Those two elections are so close in terms of the dynamic and the open competitive races at the top end of the ballot. But if you look at other states in 2014, our turnout was much higher. In Missouri, turnout was only 35%. No photo ID in Missouri. In Oklahoma, turnout was only 41%. They have a sort of watered-down version of photo ID in Oklahoma. It's not really a strict photo ID state. Nebraska has no photo ID. 48% turnout. Kansas beat them all, and we have photo ID, the most rigorous, I would argue, the most rigorous in the country, or one of it's certainly equal to in terms of the photo ID part. I don't mention Colorado because Colorado has shifted to an all-mail balloting system where every single person who's on the list gets a ballot. And to use the exact words of the Colorado Secretary of State, there is so much, quote, slop, unquote, in our lists that it is unbelievable. He talked about a state legislator who got 2 ballots, one in her maiden name, one in her married name. But I'm not going to give you a speech about how ridiculous that form of voting is and how much slop there is and how the Secretary of State of Colorado is saddled with it in trying to avoid fraud. But the point is, if you look at the comparable states that have normal traditional election structures, we had higher turnout and we have the strongest protections against fraud. The argument is dead, the idea that protecting against fraud depresses turnout. But let me respond to one of the arguments. One of the arguments on the left is, okay, Kobach, yeah, you showed the legislature there were 235 cases of voter fraud when you went and presented that testimony to him. And yeah, you showed the federal court in Wichita, 20 cases of aliens on their voter rolls in addition to that. And yeah, you've got these numbers, 200 and some, whatever, add it all up, maybe 300 cases. But look, you've got millions of votes cast over the past decade, and you've only got 200 or 300 cases of voter fraud. It's such a small percentage. That argument is a red herring. It's completely irrelevant. If you look at the most corrupt systems in American history, if you look at Chicago in the heyday of voter fraud, the number of fraudulent ballots was probably a tiny percent, probably less than 1 in 1,000 of the total ballots cast. If you look at Kansas City in the 1930s, also a system with a lot of vote buying and corrupt voting. Again, the total number of fraudulent votes cast was a very small percentage, less than 1%, no doubt. That's not the question. The question is, are there fraudulent votes in close elections? And the answer is yes. And we have close elections all the time. But fortunately in Kansas, it is now very difficult to commit voter fraud. It is almost impossible to commit voter fraud in Kansas. There are still a couple forms that you can pull off if you're determined. And so do we ever have close elections? Of course we do. Let me give you a couple examples from the recent election we just had a month ago. A couple of state representative races. Some of you familiar with the Scapa versus Sloop race in Wichita? The margin there was 28 votes. Scapa beat Sloop. And you may be familiar with this one down in Collie County, Trimmer versus Alley. Trimmer beat Alley by 17 votes. In Topeka, Hemsley beat Weigel by 40 votes. 17, 28, 40. When the margin is that small, if you've got a few dozen fraudulent votes, you can steal the election. That's why. That's the true comparison. That is the number you need to be looking at when someone on the far left says, oh, there's no problem with voter fraud. Voter fraud is such a small percentage of ballots cast. Well, of course, as a percentage of all ballots cast, it is always going to be small, even in the most fraudulent jurisdictions. But that's not the question. Okay, so Kansas has proven that our system works, and the election of 2014 was a great success. Now I want to talk about the other topic, the other area where I'm working for the rule of law in my private capacity, and that is in illegal immigration and in reaction to this amnesty for illegal aliens that the Obama administration has recently foisted upon us. And I'm sorry if the term illegal alien offends you. Illegal alien is actually the term used by federal law. There are two terms used in federal statute to describe someone who is not in the United States legally. Illegal alien or alien not lawfully present in the United States. Now that second one is a mouthful, so I stick with the shorter term, illegal alien. But of course the people, the politically correct forces have been telling us, oh, you can't use the term illegal alien, it just sounds mean. Oh, alien, that word's mean. No, it's not. When we go to a foreign country, we're aliens.
Yeah.
That's what it means. It means non-citizen. That's all. And there's a reason why you won't find the term undocumented immigrant, which is the preferred term of the left in the open borders crowd. You won't find that term in federal law, is because it's an illegal impossibility. The term immigrant in federal law means person who holds a green card, lawful permanent resident. That is what an immigrant is. Someone under law, a person who walks in legally across the border without being admitted, is not an immigrant. They are an alien. They are not an immigrant. So an undocumented immigrant is an impossibility because by definition, to be an immigrant, you have a green card. And furthermore, the term undocumented immigrant makes no sense at all. Calling an illegal alien an undocumented immigrant is analogous to calling a thief an undocumented owner. There's no document. It's not like, oh, I slipped, I lost my document. No, there is no status. There is no legal premise for owning it or for being present in the United States. Well, as you know, Obama has given us this executive order, this amnesty, and this thing is a huge problem. And it is problematic for a number of reasons. One is, it is asking federal law enforcement officers to break the law. Now, I didn't say it's asking federal law enforcement officers to look the other way when someone else breaks the law, which is what Fast and Furious was. No, this is much worse. This is asking the law enforcement officers themselves to break the law. What? What law are you talking about? How can that be? Back in 1996, Congress passed a law because the Clinton administration, Congress believed, was adopting a catch and release policy. Catching too many illegal aliens and then just turning them loose without putting them into deportation proceedings. So Congress passed a statute found in Title 8, Section 1225B2 of the U.S. Code. And in that statute, it says that certain illegal aliens shall be detained and placed in removal proceedings. Shall. Not may, but that the immigration officer shall place them in proceedings. Congress went around the executive principal, around the agency head, and told the officer, you are charged under federal law to put this person into a deportation proceeding. Obama's order tells that officer, no, you don't put them in a deportation proceeding. In fact, you hand them a goodie. You hand them work authorization. You send them over to this other agency, and you give them work authorization. You are to violate federal law, ICE agent. It is outrageous. You're asking a federal law enforcement officer to break the law he swore an oath to defend. Can you imagine putting someone in that position? I mean, imagine this. You're someone who's devoted your career to enforcing our immigration laws. You went to federal law enforcement training in Georgia at the Flexi camp. You did all the things. You trained. You got your certification, and you're an ICE agent finally. And then your political leadership tells you, yeah, we're going to ask you to break the law, and we're going to ask you to stop enforcing the law in the way you thought you trained and spent your life doing. That is why morale at ICE is at an historic low. If you want to see a federal agency where people are unhappy, go to ICE. I know a lot of ICE agents. I represent ICE agents in court. They are miserable because they're not being allowed to do the job that they trained to do. And they're being asked to break the law themselves, and they're turning an agency that used to go out and do things like worksite enforcement, go to a raid, we can't use that word, go to a place where illegal aliens are working, close the doors and sort out the illegal aliens from the lawfully present aliens and the U.S. citizen workers. They're not allowed to do that anymore. When was the last time you heard about a worksite enforcement raid? I'll tell you when. January of 2009. The Obama administration, one of the first things they did is stop worksite enforcement. So the ICE agents, most of them now, are sitting at a desk waiting for the phone to ring. Well, who are they waiting for? They're waiting for the county sheriff's office to call and say, we've arrested someone who we believe is an illegal alien. Would you come and take custody of him and remove him from the United States? Now, about 3 years ago, they were still able to do that. But then the Obama administration passed its first illegal alien amnesty, or not passed, enacted by decree, its first illegal alien executive amnesty, and that was the DACA initiative, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, for anyone who claims they came to the country before the age of 16. And immediately, when those calls started coming in, the aliens would arrive and say, the guy would be 30 years old, and the guy would say, oh yeah, I came to the country, I'm eligible for the Obama amnesty. The ICE agents overheard in the holding cells illegal, and I'm saying this based on what the ICE agents have told me and in part of their testimony in federal court. The ICE agents hear the illegal aliens telling each other, say you have the Obama amnesty. Say you're eligible for Obama's amnesty. That's all they had to say. And the ICE agents are told to stand down when the illegal alien says the words. Not make him prove it. All he has to do is assert it. I am not making this up. This is in federal court testimony in the Northern District of Dallas. This is outrageous what's going on. Let me give you another example of what happened. And this is just a foretaste of what's going to come. Because this is how the 2012 amnesty for 1.6 million people was implemented. Now Obama's got this 5 million people illegal amnesty, ordering ICE agents to break the law, and it's going to be the same implementation strategy. ICE will not be allowed to question it. When the person comes in and says, oh yeah, I have a son who's a U.S. citizen. They're not going to be able to demand proof. ICE is going to be forced to accept their word for it. Let me give you a case from El Paso. One of the plaintiffs that I represent in the case of Crane versus Johnson is, it's now in front of the 5th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. He's an ICE agent from El Paso, and shortly, about the time the Obama amnesty of the summer of 2012 was announced, there was this call from the El Paso Sheriff's Office, for the county sheriff's office in El Paso. I can't remember the name of the county. I think it is El Paso. Anyway, call comes in. We have an illegal alien young man here who we have arrested for assault. Will you come and pick him up? We know he's illegal. We believe that he may be violent. We think he should be deported. So they go pick him up. The two ICE officers take the guy. They're walking him out to the squad car, the ICE squad car, and the guy breaks free and starts fleeing. So they give chase. They catch him. The guy starts assaulting the ICE agents and dislocates one of the ICE agents' shoulder. They continue to wrestle. Finally, after a fight, they subdue the guy and they put him into the car. Okay, now he's not only committed the assault he was arrested for, he's resisted arrest and he's assaulted a federal law enforcement officer. Well, this guy's being deported, right? I mean, he's out of this country. I mean, this is obviously a bad case. He goes over to the ICE headquarters and he tells the agents, I get Obama's amnesty. The supervisor tells the two agents, let him go. Let him go. Really. And so this guy is now walking the streets of El Paso. I am not making this up. This is also from testimony in the case of Crane versus Johnson. That is how the amnesties work. ICE is handcuffed. They're not allowed to do their job, and they're forced to accept the assertion of the illegal alien. So this amnesty does the same thing. It just gives them deferred action. Deferred action is a fancy legal term for a stay in the country free card. We are telling you officially and giving you a piece of paper that says we are not going to deport you. We're not going to go so far as to say that you have a visa, because that would be shattering the law even further, but we're going to say we're not going to deport you. And not only that, we're going to give you employment authorization. You're going to get to work here legally and compete against U.S. citizens for jobs, because after all, unemployment is so low in America that we really, all the U.S. citizens are already employed. They don't have to worry about the competition, right? All right, well anyway, that case went on a preliminary injunction hearing in Dallas, and we won on the merits. The judge ruled that yes, Obama's amnesty is forcing ICE agents to break the law. And the case is a slam dunk. But the case continues to be on appeal on the question of standing, on the question of is the ICE, well, there's also the state of Mississippi they were playing with. Does the state have standing? And I won't get into the weeds of this. And then there's a jurisdictional question concerning the ICE officers. Did they have to bring their case in a adverse employment action administrative court first before they went to federal court? Anyway, so the case is in front of the Fifth Circuit. This amnesty is just as unlawful. It's also unconstitutional. Let's see, did Congress pass an amnesty anytime recently? No. Has Congress been debating amnesty? Yes. Has one house passed the DREAM Act in recent years? Yes, and then the other house rejected it, the House. Did the Senate pass an amnesty in 2006? Yes, and then the House rejected it. Yeah, Congress has contemplated using their legislative power to pass an amnesty. The executive branch does not have legislative power. You'll find it in our Constitution. Our teleprompter in chief hasn't read it much, but if he would look at Article 1, he would find that all legislative power is vested in the Congress. No legislative power is vested in the executive branch. But this executive is using legislative power, giving rights and responsibilities and privileges, which is the essence of legislative power. When you change the legislative rights of a group of people, that's legislation. If you boil it down, and as a former law professor, what is an act of legislation? It is an act, a decree by the legislature that alters the rights and responsibilities and/or privileges of a large group of people. That's what this does. So it violates the Constitution as well. Well, it's bad policy too. It's going to cause another wave of illegal immigration. Gee, what was that item that was so prominent in the media this summer, then suddenly disappeared when the next big thing came along? Oh yeah, the 70,000 plus unaccompanied minors who came across our border. Now, why did 70,000 plus unaccompanied minors come across our border? Was that just out of the blue? Was this just a random thing that the ages happen to be consistent? No! They came across because of the 2012 executive amnesty, which said, if you claim you entered the country under the age of 16 and you're still under the age of 31, you get the Stay in America free card. So, that's why we saw all these people under the age of 16 entering the United States. Now, under the terms of the directive of 2012, they're not technically eligible because you were supposed to have already been in the United States. But that didn't matter. They sent their kids, sometimes the parents sent them north, and said, get in there, get the amnesty. And how do we know this? Come on, Kobach, you're making that up. No, I'm not making it up. I can tell you this, which I've also heard from federal law enforcement agents. When the coyotes would bring them north, the coyotes would then direct them to the Border Patrol vehicles. Walk to the Border Patrol vehicle. Wait a minute, that's not what illegal aliens do. Illegal aliens sneak in the dead of night, right? Wrong. Because of this amnesty, they now march up to the Border Patrol vehicle and announce themselves as, I'm here and I'm eligible for the amnesty. They don't even know what the specific terms are. And the Border Patrol doesn't turn them back because they're instructed not to. They're coming because of the 2012 directive. That is the only reason they are coming. Still don't believe me? Then take it out of Jay Johnson's mouth. Jay Johnson is the Secretary of Homeland Security. He went down to Central America this past summer, right when the influx was at its peak. He went to Central America and gave a speech in which he told what he hoped would be an audience of people thinking about sending their kids north. He said, you need to understand this. You are not eligible unless you were already in the United States as of June 15, 2012. So he knew that he was going down there to try to stem the wave because they were all coming because of what his predecessor, Janet Napolitano, with Obama's backing, had done. So why do I bring this up? The same thing's going to happen now. There will be another wave, and it will be even bigger because it won't matter what age you are. You just have to come to the United States and falsely claim that you have a U.S. citizen child and that you have a green card holding child. and it is going to be immense. Oh, but people won't lie, will they? Oh, yeah. You know, the last time we had a big amnesty was a legitimate one. Congress actually passed it. That was back when we had a president who read the Constitution. And that was in 1986. It was the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, which was passed with bipartisan support and signed by President Reagan, who later stated that he regretted signing that amnesty. But that legalized 3.2 million people. They had to claim that they were seasonal agriculture workers. Among the 3.2 million people were Mahmoud the Red Abu Halami and his brother, Mohammed Abu Halami, who were two of the members of the 1993 cohort that attacked the World Trade Center. Neither one of them was a seasonal agricultural worker. Mahmoud was working as a cab driver in New York City, but he claimed falsely on his federal form that he was a seasonal agricultural worker. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
The same thing is happening with the DACA directive of 2012. People are claiming that they were already here when they were not. And the same thing will happen with the current amnesty. People will claim that they were here as of the date Obama announced it, even though they were not. You know the why? Because you can't prove when you came in if you're an illegal alien. There's nobody sitting on the north side of the Rio Grande with a little piece of paper handing you a card saying, yep, you came in on this date, here's your card, here's your certificate. There's no way to prove when you came in. And so the federal government, in order to make these amnesties available to people who have no way of proving it, they accept no proof. And so they'll accept things like, oh, do you have a utility bill from some time in a year, one of the early years you were here? Miraculously, they managed to produce what looks like a utility bill. How did you keep your utility bills from years ago? I don't. Maybe other people do. But that's the whole point. If you're going to give an amnesty to people who don't have any legal proof that they were here, you will accept either no proof, or you will accept mere affidavit, or you will accept flimsy proof. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Anyway, back to the Reagan amnesty of 1986, and it pains me to call it the Reagan amnesty, but unfortunately he did sign it. 3.2 million people got the amnesty. ICE, or then it was INS, discovered almost 400,000 people who fraudulently applied for the amnesty, that ICE was able to detect the fraud. So they rejected 400,000 cases of people who were lying, and INS figured it out. And we don't know how many of the 3.2 million were also lying, like the Abu Halima brothers, who later attempted to blow up the World Trade Center. So this amnesty is no different. That's why ICE is already preparing, and Border Patrol is already preparing for another huge surge in illegal immigration. This executive lawless amnesty will cause it. It is not a probability, it is a certainty. And finally, let me mention, it's the ultimate unfunded mandate. Did you know that according to a Heritage Foundation study in 2007, the average illegal alien-headed household with children costs the American taxpayer net $19,600 a year. Net. That's after you take into account any taxes that the illegal alien contributes, the household contributes, any sales taxes, gasoline taxes, cigarette taxes, you name it. We, the taxpayer, are still $19,600 in the hole. And this amnesty is actually directed at exactly that household, because in order to claim that you're eligible for the amnesty, you have to say that you have children in the United States. So we are offering an unconstitutional illegal amnesty to what is arguably the most expensive subgroup of illegal aliens in the United States. Way to go, Mr. President. And the American taxpayer is going to pay for it. But hey, that's okay. We don't have any deficits in this country. It's not a problem. Okay, so we have a case right now in federal circuit court, the Fifth Circuit. That's the case that I mentioned, where I'm representing 10 ICE agents plus the state of Mississippi. There will be another case regarding Obama's current amnesty. Rest assured. In fact, there's already one that Sheriff Joe has already launched down in Arizona. I'm not involved in that one. I've worked with Sheriff Joe before, but not in this particular case. There may be several challenges to this amnesty because it's not even close. It's not even a remotely close argument as to whether the president has this authority. It's got to be done. We have to sue. Our founding fathers designed the three branches of government, and the idea was that one branch would check the other branches, or two branches would check the other branches. Okay, let's get back to constitutional basics. How are we going to stop this? The way to stop this is for either the legislative branch or the judicial branch, or both, to stop the executive branch from acting in violation of the Constitution. I am hoping that these lawsuits will trigger the judicial branch to exercise its constitutional duty to stop the executive branch from violating the Constitution. And we will see. And I'm sorry to say that it will depend heavily upon which judges are drawn for the case. Not all cases go to the Supreme Court. Only 2 to 3% of cases that go to the federal circuit courts, the intermediate level, go on to the United States Supreme Court. Let me rephrase that. Only 2 to 3% of the cases that are appealed to the Supreme Court are accepted by the Supreme Court. It is a tiny fraction of cases. So the case could very well end up in the U.S. Court of Appeals, the circuit court, and it depends entirely on which 3 judges you draw. And so we'll see whether the Constitution wins or whether our imperial presidency wins in these cases. But let me close by answering one of the arguments. You've heard the defenders of the Obama administration go on TV. You've heard them say, oh, this is completely within the president's authority. It's prosecutorial discretion. You heard that argument? Yeah, it's just prosecutorial discretion. No, it's not. Prosecutorial discretion is when a prosecutor looks at one individual and says, you know what, we don't have enough evidence to convict you. Or, in the case of an ICE agent, the agent looks at one particular case and says, you know, we don't even have enough evidence to persuade an immigration judge that you're here illegally. I mean, let's imagine this is a far-fetched example. Let's imagine Wild Bill's an illegal alien, all right? And he was actually born in, he's from New York? Okay, it's close to the same. Let's imagine that he's born in, in Sudan. And someone discovers, no, he wasn't born in Sudan. We don't know, but someone alleges that he was born in Sudan. Because when he was applying for college, he thought he could get a special deal if he was a foreign student, so he told them on his application that he's from Sudan. So they discover the application. And let's imagine, furthermore, that he was called for jury duty recently in Florida. And when he was called for jury duty, he really didn't want to serve on the jury, so he checked the box saying, I'm not a U.S. citizen. And so using those 2 pieces of evidence, we have his college application paper saying he's from Sudan, and we have his jury pool declining paper trying to get out of the jury duty. And we say, look, ICE, we've got proof. He is not here illegally. You will find no evidence of a Sudanese person that goes by Wild Bill in the United States. It's probably true. And he's illegal. But the ICE agent is going to look at him and say, well, you know, he's told a story. He appears to be born in the United States. He says he's got all this documentation establishing his birth. He says he's got siblings who can corroborate when and where he was born. I don't think we're going to prosecute. We're not going to deport because the case isn't strong enough. That's prosecutorial discretion. You look at one individual case and you decide whether you have a good case or not and whether to deport it. What Obama is doing is he's taking a category of 5 million people and he's saying, before we even know anything about you, you 5 million people, we're not going to enforce the law against you. Effectively, the law does not apply to you. That's not prosecutorial discretion. That's changing the law for 5 million people and defining that 5 million person class according to certain attributes. That is legislation, not prosecutorial discretion. There's a really good example that I've heard some commentators use, and it is a good one. It's an apt analogy. Imagine if Romney had won the election in 2012, and he had a Democrat-controlled Congress. Imagine the same Congress that we had for the last 2 years, and the Senate was controlled by Democrats, and Romney really wanted to eliminate the tax on capital gains. It's a thing a lot of us Republicans would like to see happen. But he couldn't get it through the Senate. Couldn't get it through the Senate. Why won't you senators enact comprehensive tax reform? Come on, I'm willing to give and take. It's Congress's duty to enact comprehensive tax reform. Why won't you do it? Oh, he cajoles the Senate. He works on it for 2 years and they refuse to budge. And so he says, well, it's my duty as president to just make this happen anyway. I am hereby declaring that the IRS will not collect or enforce in the collection of capital gains as long as I am president. That is exactly what has just happened. The president has effectively changed the law by telling every American who has any capital gains the law does not apply to you. You do not have to pay your taxes and you won't pay any penalty. Can you imagine how hopping mad the Democrats would be? Rightfully, they would be righteously indignant, and correctly so, because as much as I might like to end the taxation on capital gains, my president of my party doesn't have the authority to do that unilaterally. They would be indignant. Oh, and what about the editorial pages in the papers? They too would be righteously indignant. Are they indignant about Obama right now? I don't know. Has the Hutch News run an editorial criticizing the amnesty? It's possible, I don't know. No? Okay, I'm not surprised. But do you see, when the shoe's on the other foot, you know what would happen. If a Republican president tried to enact legislation through an executive decree and dressed it up as prosecutorial discretion, people would be laughing. They would be shouting. They would be saying it's an outrage, and the newspaper editorial pages would be going right along with it and saying, correctly, it is an outrage. But when this president does it, not a word. What does it take to get an editorial page to lift a finger and print an article condemning the shredding of our Constitution? Look, I agree that there are some reasonable arguments on the other side of whether to have an amnesty or not. I think those arguments are weak ones, but I think a reasonable person could hold those arguments and could make those arguments. That is an argument for the Congress to have, and our founding fathers designed it so that Congress, the representatives of the people, would make legislation. But how is it that people who favor an amnesty are completely silent when our Constitution is violated and the law is violated? Some people in this country have decided that the ends justify the means. That is a horrible state in America. I hear far too few liberal voices. I have read no liberal editorials, liberal editorial writers saying, this is wrong, Mr. President. We agree with you on amnesty, but don't do this. I'm sure there's probably one out there. I really am. But if there is, you could probably count the number on one hand. I've heard some Democrat members of Congress raise their voices and say, this is wrong, Mr. President. We like amnesty, we don't like the way you're doing this. The rule of law. That's what it's about. The rule of law allows people who disagree to coexist in this country and to be secure in the knowledge that even if we lose the election, there will be laws and there will be rules confining how far the government can go. The rule of law gives us the confidence that the elections themselves will not be stolen. Once you take out the rule of law, once you take out the confidence in the fairness of elections, what is there that holds the American Constitution together and the American Republic together? Not much. That's why I do what I do. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Does anybody have any questions for Secretary Kobach?
Or for Bill, too.
Or Bill, go on.
I got some.
Thank you, by the way, both of them.
I have an immigrant story right here in Kansas. We had a legal immigrant in a bacon packing plant who had to work double shift when the ICE called their plant with a 48-hour notice to let them know they were coming to raid them. So what they did is the ones that were legal, they worked in double shifts and let the other ones off. But actually, the Bush administration George W. Bush administration started standing down the ICE agents. Chris Ann Hall was a prosecutor in Florida and said that a friend of hers an ICE agent told her that they were forcing them to stand down there in Florida. But my question is, since Obama's named himself emperor, why don't we have the conservative Republican governors refuse to give any state benefits to illegal aliens except one, a bus ticket to DC and San Francisco and Los Angeles? If we could send 5 million people by bus there, then maybe we'd get some juice off of it.
Well, a couple things. One, on the factual statement you said at the beginning about ICE agents, I have to say that although I left the Bush administration by this time, so I'm not defending my own actions. I was involved in immigration enforcement during the critical 2 years after 9/11. Between 05 and 08, the Bush administration, if you look at the graph of worksite enforcement, of criminal prosecutions in the workplace, it goes like this. I mean, it was climbing. And part of the reason, I believe, was, of course, that President Bush wanted to develop credibility that he was aggressively enforcing the law when he went to Congress, mistakenly, in my opinion, and asked for an amnesty. And he wanted to say, look, I'm really serious about enforcing the law. When I say enforcement, it's working. And then that graph showed massive worksite enforcement increase in those years. But then Obama comes into office and just drops to zero. The states do need to recognize that they can create incentives. And states are supposed to deny all benefits to illegal aliens. You'll find it in Title 8, Section 1621 of the U.S. Code. Congress passed that law in 1996 too. Same act that I mentioned earlier had that provision as well. Why did Congress pass that? Because Congress recognized that if you hand out goodies to people who are illegally in the country, then more will come. And those who are here already will stay, because if one family member has a job and the other family member, household member, is able to get some benefits, oh, and by the way, any kids they may have would have the finest education in the Western Hemisphere for free, then of course you create an incentive for people to stay. So Congress passed a law saying no illegal alien, they use the term no ineligible alien, which is, I won't get into the reasons why, but no illegal alien may receive any public benefit from any state. And then they made an exception for K-12 education because of a Supreme Court decision called Plyler versus Doe in the 1980s. But other than that, and emergency medical care, nothing. You think the state of Kansas has passed a law consistent with that federal law denying benefits to illegal aliens? No.
No.
You think I have proposed legislation to the Kansas legislature many times over my career, long before I was Secretary of State, to encourage them to pass that law? Yes. Legislature hasn't passed it. Now is the time for the Kansas legislature to pass it. To make Kansas.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Look, one last point. Illegal aliens are rational decision makers. All human beings are rational decision makers. We weigh the costs and benefits. You decided to come tonight because the benefits, I might hear Kobach say something interesting. Well, Bill sounds like an interesting guy. I heard about him. The benefits outweighed the costs, which were zero. See, if we charged you money, then you probably wouldn't have come. I don't know. Anyway, you didn't charge him anything, Jimmy, did you? No. Okay, see, the costs outweighed, the benefits outweighed the costs, so you came. Same thing with illegal aliens. If the benefits of staying in the United States unlawfully outweigh the costs of staying in the United States unlawfully, you stay. This is like basic economics.
Yeah.
And so that's why, if a state wants to discourage illegal immigration, remove the benefits.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the Congress's power of the purse. What can Congress do to try to defund Obama's amnesty program? I mean, can they defund the ability for the government to print forms, to pay people? Can Congress do this to as a power of the purse?
Yeah, absolutely. Congress in an appropriations bill, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I was just kind of doing my speech, without notes at that point, and so that's I mentioned the judicial branch has to stand up. The legislative branch needs to stand up too by attempting to defund this amnesty. Now I say attempt because currently the U.S. Senate is in control of the Democrats, and there are not enough Democrats who see the unconstitutionality and the problem of what Obama has just done. So it probably will have to wait until the new Congress is sworn in January, and then you have enough people in control of both houses to say, yeah, this is unconstitutional. It takes away Congress's ability to legislate exclusively, and it is possible to basically say we will fund every single thing in the federal government except this very narrow sliver of what the Department of Homeland Security does. And then the president is now threatening to shut down the government, say, well, I will refuse to sign that budget if it doesn't include this tiny part. And you know what the papers will say? Oh, Republicans shut down the government. No, Republicans didn't shut down the government. Republicans shut down one tiny sliver of the government. And the president is so intent on having his way that he is saying he'll veto anything that doesn't include funding for his unconstitutional amnesty. Now, I don't know if that's an empty threat or not. Maybe he would sign it. But Congress has to put him to the test.
Yeah.
They have to say, we're not going to pay for this.
Amen.
There will be no salaries paid for anyone who is implementing this amnesty at ICE or USCIS, Citizenship and Immigration Services, which hands out the word authorization. So yeah, they need to, they must. It's what our founding fathers depended on, that the other two branches would act to check a branch that went off the rails. And this executive branch has gone off our constitutional
Chris, doesn't the House has the full capability? The Senate only has advice and consent.
No, both House and Senate have to pass an appropriations
No.
bill. Now, you're thinking of advice and consent for Senate, for treaties
Article
and
1,
consent.
Section 7.
Every act of legislation has to be passed by both houses. It's the bicameralism. So an act for
So
suspending.
if it doesn't get passed, if the House doesn't, refuses to pass it, the government gets shut down.
Oh, if the House, right, the House couldn't unilaterally act.
They don't have to
Yeah.
buy.
Well, they already tried that. After in the lawsuit that I'm representing, the 10 ICE agents, after we won our victory on the merits in a preliminary injunction hearing in Texas, the U.S. House of Representatives immediately took that victory, and you can read it in the congressional record. They said a federal judge has just ruled that this DACA amnesty is illegal, and they removed funding in the Department of Homeland Security budget for anything to implement that amnesty. So the House already tried that. What happened? It went to the Senate. The Senate stuck it back in, and they didn't. The Senate would keep sticking it back in, and then the Republicans would be blamed for not passing a budget.
So what? Let them get blamed.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the point is they play this game.
Appreciate it when they stand.
Right.
up.
I hear you. They play this game where the House would take it out, the Senate would put it back in, the House would take it out, put it back in, and eventually you get to the point where the government now the funding has run out. And so without the Senate playing along, the House leadership, I think, reasonably recognized that we can't do this alone. We need the Senate. Now we have both houses after January. That is a hope. Yeah, I agree. I see you shaking your head, and I agree. Let's see how
Yeah.
much backbone they have.
Amen.
But now they don't have the excuse.
Right.
Now there is no excuse for any member of the House of Representatives who's a Republican to say, well, but the Senate's in Democrat hands, we can't
Yeah.
keep playing this game. Now you can play the game and you can win the game.
Yep.
And you must win the game because our republic depends on it.
Amen.
You have to exercise your legislative power to check a lawless executive. Just like we are hoping and praying that whatever judges in the courts of appeals get these cases will exercise their judicial power to check a lawless executive. We are in a constitutional crisis right now. Let me say that again. We are in a constitutional crisis right now.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is, our country is so prosperous, and our country has so much inherent stability because of private enterprise and because of all the institutions that we have built in this country, that you don't feel the constitutional crisis, do you? You don't feel like your front door is going to get kicked down at any moment and you are personally going to be in danger. You don't feel that you're going to lose your job. You don't feel that you won't be able to feed your family. And so the interesting thing is, our prosperity as a nation has made us less sensitive to the shredding of our Constitution, to the loss of our liberties. If the people are happy enough and there's good football on the giant flat screen TV and there's plenty of
Ridden
food,
circuses.
oh, who cares about the Constitution? Those are those crazy Patriot Freedom Alliance folks who get all worked up about the Constitution. I'm watching football.
Yeah.
That's the situation we're in right now.
Yep.
We are seeing things that are akin to what I read at the beginning of my presentation. He has enacted pretended acts of legislation. He has abolished our charters, meaning he has essentially ignored our Constitution. The charters were the constitutions of the colonies. He has done all of these lawless things, and they were enraged. And they were enraged because they saw a direct threat to their livelihoods. They weren't a hugely prosperous nation. They weren't distracted by so many electronic gimmicks and by television and by all these other things. They recognized that it was part of their lives to be active members of the Republic. Just like you recognize by being here that it's part of your life to be an active member of our Republic. It's amazing to me. I think if you step back and you look, we are in a bona fide constitutional crisis here. We have seen a president exercise authority far beyond anything any other president has even dreamed of doing. I heard Obama compare himself to Lincoln. Give me a break.
Yeah.
Give me a break. President Lincoln decreed the Emancipation Proclamation. That is often, as a guy who was a law professor for 15 years, that is the example everybody uses when they say that Lincoln violated the Constitution. Well, actually, the Emancipation Proclamation was decreed as part of his war powers. He was in a war, he was commander-in-chief, and he issued a decree to free the slaves of the opposing side, in the hope that that would strategically jeopardize the South. That was, I believe, an arguably valid exercise of the war powers. Now, what happened was, as soon as the war ended, however, many people said, hey, what about this Emancipation Proclamation? President Lincoln used his war powers authority to do that. Is it still valid? And the Reconstruction Congress immediately acted to start drafting the Civil War amendments, including the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. So they recognized that there were limits, that President Lincoln had exercised war powers, but that those war powers expired with the termination of the war. He was doing what he could to abide by the Constitution and use constitutional authority he had. Mr. President, I didn't know Abraham Lincoln, but I've sure read a lot about him, and you know Abraham Lincoln.
Anybody else?
I have a question. Greg Abbott of Texas is suing Obama over this immigration. Does Candace plan to join into that?
I can tell you I don't know. I don't know because I have not been in direct contact with Greg Abbott. He's not going to be Attorney General beyond next month in Texas. And so I don't know. And well, I probably shouldn't say much more, but his statements have, I hope Texas does sue. But I don't know exactly what Attorney General Abbott is talking about in terms of the specific suit he is mentioning.
He stated on Fox this morning that it would be coming in the next few days.
Yeah, and there's some funny things about that, but I won't say them because I probably shouldn't be speaking out of school. But yeah, if Texas sues, that'd be great. Every state in the union, I believe, has standing to bring this suit because of the financial burden that'll fall on those states. You also asked about Kansas. I have not specifically talked with Attorney General Schmidt about Kansas suing. He hasn't expressed publicly any intention to sue, but rest assured there will be lawsuits, and there will probably be multiple lawsuits.
One other thing, I'd like to see the EPA defunded also.
Yeah. Let's shut down part of the government.
You mean you don't regard that ditch in your backyard as a navigable waterway? Okay.
What's the status of the border fence that George Bush signed into law? It's supposed to be a double fence with sensors and very secure.
Well, that law was enacted in October of 2006. Why would Congress pass a bill in October of an even-numbered year? Because there was an election coming in November of 2006, and Congress wanted to demonstrate to us, the American people, that Congress was serious about this. And so Congress enacted a law mandating a 700-mile section of double wall fencing like what exists on the San Ysidro sector, which is near San Diego. An incredibly successful barrier. Took one of the most porous sections of the U.S. border, transformed it into arguably one of the most secure sections of the U.S.-Mexico border. And what happened? Well, the executive branch eventually said, well, we don't think we have to technically do the kind of fencing that they're talking about. And then, unfortunately, the Bush administration made a really, I think, incorrect decision and said, well, maybe we can do virtual fencing. Okay, virtual fencing. The equivalent of that, let's suppose you decided you needed a fence because your neighbor was trespassing on your property every night and his dog was pooping in your yard, right? Okay, a real fence is a structure made of wood or metal that has a physical hardness to it that the dog cannot pass through. A virtual fence you can buy at Cabela's or Dick's Sporting Goods, and it's called a little motion camera, or trail cam, and it will take a picture of the dog pooping in your yard. That's a virtual fence. And the virtual fence that I'm sorry to say the Bush administration started exploring, and then the Obama administration was, oh good, let's do a virtual fence. It's basically having drones and sensors that tell you when someone has crossed the border where a fence should be. And then maybe, just maybe, you'll get that sense, you'll get the reading from the sensor in time to send a Border Patrol agent to maybe try to track them down and find them, even though the Border Patrol agent is 50 miles away. So, yeah, a virtual fence is not a fence.
Are they going to put that around the White House?
Very good point. Yeah, when there are virtual fences around the White House, then we can take seriously a virtual fence honorably.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming, both of you, Bill, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.